The 48-inch JZ980 is the smallest and most affordable 2021 OLED TV from Panasonic. It is equipped with a conventional OLED panel from LG Display, delivering a peak brightness of 640 nits on a 10% window after calibration to D65 white point and 110 nits full fill. Because of OLED's pixel-level light control, HDR presentation came across very refined without any distracting luminance fluctuations or blooming artifacts which plague LED LCD televisions. While some LG OLED televisions would manifest delayed HDR luminance fluctuations upon APL change, the Panasonic JZ980 presented the same HDR content in an incredibly stable manner. HDR colors on the JZ980 were impressively accurate even out of the box, with a DCI-P 3-color gamut coverage of 99% UV, while Retinity coverage was 76%. We are big fans of Panasonic's HDR10 tone mapping philosophy, which strikes a good balance between average picture level or APL and bright highlight detail, although some highlight compression was unavoidable owing to the panel's peak brightness. Panasonic's dynamic tone mapping worked well to make specular highlights look more impactful without affecting the overall brightness, unlike LG's implementation which would brighten or darken the entire picture, thus deviating from the creative intent. The Panasonic JZ980 supports TV-led Dolby Vision, allowing for tone curve adjustments based on dynamic metadata on a scene-by-scene or even frame-by-frame basis. Like all other Panasonic OLED televisions we've tested so far, the Dolby Vision IQ picture mode on the JZ980 still applied some forced sharpening, noise reduction, and motion processing, making it unappealing for videophiles like me. To add HDMI 2.1 functionality for gaming, Panasonic has adopted Mediatek's HDMI 2.1 SoC, but just like what we've observed on other TV models using a similar chipset without the help of a coprocessor to compensate, there is inevitably some degradation in native gradation, particularly in areas containing relatively uniform color tones, as well as in regions just above black, which unfortunately chipped away at the Japanese manufacturer's class-leading near-black handling among OLED brands. Calibrated SDR color accuracy didn't quite reach the excellence of step-up Panasonic OLEDs, but average delta error still measured under 2, allowing colors including skin tones to look natural and realistic in real-world content. Smaller OLED panels generally have better uniformity than larger panels, and our 48-inch Panasonic JZ980 review sample exhibited no dirty screen effect or DSE, bending or color tinting on full-fill gray slides, despite some vignetting along the sides as well as customary thin vertical streaks. Overall, the uniformity still ranked among one of the cleaner examples we've seen all year. Unlike last year's Panasonic HZ980, the JZ980 uses an OLED panel with 120Hz refresh rate, and so could apply 5.5 pull-down to reproduce 24 frames per second movies correctly without telecenic judder, even with intelligent frame creation or IFC disabled. Due to the smaller screen size of the 48-inch Panasonic JZ980, the mild stutter that's inherent in 24p films wasn't obvious to our eyes at all. But if you are one of those who cannot tolerate the 24p stutter, which is exaggerated by OLED's near instantaneous pixel response time, then you can try setting intelligent frame creation or IFC to min, which would apply some motion smoothing without incurring as much soap opera effect or SOE as some other implementations by rival brands. Note that in complex moving sequences, even the least aggressive IFC setting of min would introduce the odd interpolation artifacts and frame skipping, especially in scenes containing smoke or fog. So as purists, we would rather leave IFC off altogether when watching movies. Where intelligent frame creation or IFC can be very helpful is to improve the motion clarity of 50 frames per second or 60 frames per second content. With IFC disabled, motion resolution came in at a sample and hold baseline of 300 lines on this horizontally scrolling test pattern. But similar to other televisions using a Mediatek HDMI 2.1 chipset without coprocessor, there were some artifacts around the 170 level. Engaging IFC would boost motion resolution to the traditional OLED ceiling of 650 lines, with the custom setting allowing you to adjust the deblur and dejudder values independently of each other. Motion resolution can be increased to 1080 lines or even higher by activating 120Hz black frame insertion or BFI, which offers 3 strengths. Going up the intensity scale will improve motion clarity, but also make the picture dimmer. Please be advised that engaging black frame insertion would cut HDR peak brightness by more than half, with a corresponding darkening of the PQ EOTF tracking, so we don't recommend it for HDR content at all. Upscaling was decent, retrieving nice detail from this SMPTE RP133 test card in 576i, albeit with mild overshoot and fizziness. With film cadence mode enabled, the Panasonic JZ980 successfully detected and processed 3.2 and 2.2 cadences in film-based interlaced material. In terms of video mode deinterlacing, the Panasonic JZ980 suppressed jaggies relatively effectively, with some jagged edges showing on the second bouncing bar in this HQV benchmark test pattern. On this 1080p test pattern from the Spears & Munsell HD benchmark disc, the television could pass full chroma bandwidth once the pure direct mode was engaged. But because this would also disable many motion processing including 5.5 pull-down, we would only reserve pure direct for PC use. With game mode engaged, input lag measured 14 milliseconds at 60 frames per second, dropping to a very responsive 5.7 milliseconds at 120 frames per second. Out of the 4 HDMI connections available on the television, 2 ports, namely HDMI 1 and HDMI 2, are HDMI 2.1, offering an HDMI 2.1 bandwidth of 40 gigabits per second as verified by the versatile Meridio 7G signal generator. Following a firmware update, Panasonic is the first TV manufacturer that managed to unlock full 4K 120Hz resolution together with HDR and VRR from the Mediatek HDMI 2.1 SoC without needing a co-processor, as you can see on the JZ980 with 4K 120Hz bypass mode engaged. It's not all plain sailing though, because enabling 4K 120Hz bypass mode would also lock out the ability to turn off HDR tone mapping to simulate HGIG. And so HGIG compliant games such as Dirt 5 won't look as punchy or retain as much specular highlight detail as LG OLEDs, whose HGIG function continues to work at 4K 120Hz. Otherwise, you can choose to disable 4K 120Hz bypass mode to allow for HGIG by disabling HDR tone mapping, then adjusting the clipping threshold to 700 nits, after which you can set max TML and max FFTML to 700 nits on HGIG calibration screens. This will sacrifice full 4K 120Hz resolution and to a lesser extent native gradation, but hopefully most owners won't notice these from a normal viewing distance when playing console games. You may see some VRR flicker in certain games. Unfortunately, this is a hardware issue which affects all pre-2022 OLED panels. Dolby Vision gaming was capped at 60Hz, but given how hit and miss we've found even native Dolby Vision games to be, we don't think this is a big deal at all. In terms of design, the anti-glare coating on the Panasonic JZ980 was hazier than that implemented on higher up models, producing a slight magenta tint when hit by light. Audio quality was average. There's some bass which didn't go as low as step-up models. Mid-range and highs sounded clear, although soundstage remained narrow with subpar directionality. To sum up, the JZ980 is yet another high-quality OLED TV from Panasonic, delivering cinematic colors, multi-HDR support, low input lag, as well as full 4K 120Hz resolution with HDR and VRR, the first TV with a Mediatek HDMI 2.1 chipset we've tested to be able to do so, and so the Panasonic JZ980 receives our highly recommended award. For gaming, we still think the LG C1 is better, thanks to 4 HDMI 2.1 inputs, not to mention full resolution 4K 120Hz that works together with HGIG and Dolby Vision. But is Dolby Vision gaming all that it's cracked up to be? Find out the answer in our side-by-side comparison versus HDR10 gaming here.